Hey everyone, my name is Charlie Martin and welcome back to another episode of Why Advocate. This is a show where we highlight the works of student advocates and what got them into advocacy to begin with. Today I have a very special guest. I'm speaking with Kate, an executive with Western Student Union. Today, Kate and I discuss the importance of accessibility on campus and addressing the barriers that students face when it comes to accessibility. We also talk about Kate's advocacy journey and what led her to become interested in both planning and advocacy. Okay, welcome back everybody. I am now talking with Kate. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Charlie?
I'm doing really good, thank you. First off, I'd just like to say thank you for being part of the show today. We have a really good conversation coming up, but first, I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself. Quickly, who is Kate?
My name is Kate Georgia Traynor, so that's my full name. My pronouns are she, her. I attend the University of Waterloo, and I study planning. But if you don't know what planning is, you can call it urban planning, or my definition that I like to go by is that if architects design buildings, planners design cities, but we also design different rural communities as well. I'm passionate about urban design, so I'm doing a specialization in urban design and then also a minor in legal studies. I have an older sister. I have a dog.
So you're an executive part of your student union at Waterloo. Do you just mind describing quickly what that experience is like and what got you involved in that to begin with?
Yep, that's a fair question. I actually probably should have said what I do for a living, at least right now when I was doing my introduction. So I currently work at OUSA, which is the Waterloo Undergraduate Student Association, and I work as the vice president who works alongside the current president at OUSA and our board of directors. So my experience being a part of student governance really began when I first came to the university. I didn't actually interact that much with my own student union, though I kind of wish I did now, but I think COVID really put a wrench in that. So a lot of my classes were hybrid, so I didn't really have the opportunity to explore campus in depth and get really familiar with lots of our services, but I ended up doing lots of part-time jobs with different campus stakeholders and then also interacted with my program association and then also my faculty student association. And that type of leadership development made me feel as though I had enough adequate skills to apply to the position of VP at OUSA and really support other ongoing initiatives. So currently a lot of my work is external advocacy. So that includes OUSA, as you probably already know, Charlie, but also UCRU on the federal level, which is undergraduates of Canadian research intensive universities. I always mess it up when I say it. And municipal level advocacy when I go to interact with town and gown and different leaders within the KWCG region, which is Kitchener, Cambridge, Guelph, Waterloo. Not in that order, but I said it in that order.
Nice. So that all sounds very cool. Like that whole advocacy journey, you're doing it on 3 different levels of government, which is very cool to hear. Good on you for doing that. How would you?
It's a tough life.
It's a tough life. Fair enough, but it's the work you're doing is really good. So good on you for that. How has that experience been so far? How have you found your advocacy role with Waterloo at the moment?
I would say I found my advocacy role really beneficial and really insightful. For example, I've always been passionate about helping other people within my community. And that's another thing that really drew me into this idea of being a part of OUSA and being a part of student government. I would say the most rewarding experience I've had so far is really just learning more about provincial and federal level advocacy. And I say that because I actually lived abroad. I lived in Singapore before I came to Canada. So I have no clue what's going on in Canada for 13 years. And then I moved to the country and I am thinking to myself, what is this place? Where have I arrived? Culture shock, what is going on? And after spending so much time interacting with different staff at my student union and just learning more about what student representatives can advocate on to improve the lives of students on their campus and the quality of their education is just something that I find so fascinating now, and that was probably the most rewarding part about attending my university and also doing the job that I'm doing now.
So just going off of that and some of the works that you have been doing on campus right now, Is there any like piece of policy or any like initiative that you took on in your role, or something that you're currently passionate about, that you would like to discuss today?
So I would say, as a planner, my main passion has been and always will be looking at different urban environments and specifically looking at accessible infrastructure on our university campuses. For example, in planning, we have this concept of a 15-minute city where within 15 minutes you should have access to all of your basic necessities, and that can include transit services, access to grocery stores, access to, let's say, your educational institute, and housing that's affordable or within that realm of 15 minutes. And I think that should be duplicated onto campus infrastructure, and we should look at different ways that we can improve access for students, because something that we always talk about in planning is transit, since it's like a buzzword for us.
Maybe you could describe to me what are some of the challenges that you see on not only your own campus but other campuses across Ontario when it comes to accessibility for our students?
I'd say we can probably start with defining what accessibility is. So, a lot of the work that we've done at OUSA and other information that we've gathered from the Ontario Undergraduate Student Survey is this definition of how we can look at accessibility, which encompasses physical, academic, and financial barriers to post-secondary institutions and or post-secondary campuses. But a lot of the main challenges that students face when it comes to physical barriers usually includes proximity to classes, housing availability, modes of transport or available transit to get onto campus. Let's say the ability to enter buildings on campus either due to aging infrastructure or inadequate support for accessibility, but also factors that consider safety and limited campus facilities due to the increasing nature of student population within our campus and that return from COVID back to our campus, and if we can support that at our different universities.
Now, talking about like I guess physical barriers when it comes to accessibility on campus, what are some like examples that you could think of that, like, for students who aren't aware of the barriers that we see on campus?
It's a hard question to ask. I would say, in terms of physical barriers that, let's say, people can spot right away, and then maybe we can shift the conversation to what we don't normally see on a day-to-day basis, is that we're easily able to identify this realm of lack of transit to campus and the proximity to campus, because we have to look at where we're going to live and the time cost associated with that. Or let's say we can't find the specific class that we have to go to. But in terms of invisible barriers that we might not see, it really depends on, let's say, your own lived experience on campus. For example, let's say students who have disabilities don't always have their current needs represented on the campus itself. And let's say me, as a student who doesn't have a physical disability, might not be familiar with the different barriers and challenges that they might face. For instance, a lot of disabilities might include disability returning from mental illness, visual impairment, or a physical disability that inhibits them from accessing a space, which, if you are able to walk to your classroom, if you are able to go to your professor right after class is over, if you are able to walk from home to campus itself and get access to food and all of these other things, another person who might have these physical barriers or might be impeded due to the disability that they might have is something that we don't notice on a day-to-day basis and doesn't come up that often when we start planning for the future of our campuses and what they look like. But on that note, there's also other invisible barriers that don't often get discussed, and that's really the dialogue around, let's say, different experiences that students who are going to satellite campuses might feel. For example, satellite campuses, or let's take the University of Waterloo since I'm already here. We have 2 satellite campuses, or 3, but I'm going to identify 2. One is in Stratford, which is around, I'm going to say 30 to 45 minutes of driving. and there's no alternative mode of transit to get there. But you wouldn't know that unless you were really part of that program or you were friends with people within that program. So to some students who are part of that program, that's a visible barrier to you accessing your campus. That is an accessibility issue that is identified by the institution, but the means of improving that access are not being considered and not taken seriously. And that dialogue doesn't usually happen on campus, because if you're an on-campus student, your main concern is, how do I access main campus? I say on campus, but I'm probably referring to main campus. Another, I would say, really prominent invisible barrier for a lot of students is, let's say, students who might have religious needs, or students who are part of the LGBTQI plus or queer community. For example, they have different lived experiences where they might, let's say, require spaces that make them feel safe, inclusive, and protected against, let's say, increasing rhetoric that discriminates against the queer community. And if those spaces aren't in place, that discomfort with attending the institution in itself is a physical barrier, and not having that space makes students not have the capacity or ability to really attend their post-secondary institution effectively.
How do we challenge this? How do we, break these barriers to make accessibility on campus more available for students?
I would say the first thing that always has to be done is identifying the unique needs of students on that campus. And there are very important key questions that you have to look at when you're trying to dig deeper into the root of the problem. For example, housing, transit, community, and accessibility and infrastructure on campus are considered wicked problems. And in planning, we considered wicked problems, and I'm sure it's familiar rhetoric with a lot of people, as something that is almost impossible to solve due to the nature and complexity of the problem and how many different factors are a part of that complex issue that you're trying to solve. But I believe what the key questions are is, who attends our post-secondary institutes? Who should the university really be servicing? And what exactly should the master plan of, let's say, campuses in 10 to 15 years into the future really reflect? And what are the student needs? And what exactly are those invisible barriers that we have to identify in order to accommodate different students who are attending on-campus, main campus environments, or even satellite campuses? And lastly, who should be investing in our institutions? For example, we talk a lot about the institutions themselves, but one of the key ways that we can really develop our post-secondary institutes is through investment through the province, and having grant funding being provided to our different institutions to invest more in our campus infrastructure and accessibility on campus. So that's kind of like the step of, in my mind, how we can effectively look at the problem as a whole. But in terms of really solving the issue, maybe at face value, and maybe some key insights that we could take away, is first, some recommendations that we've talked about for our OUSA papers is recognizing the fact that having long-term sustainable campuses that have an intersection of different needs of students who are attending their post-secondary institutes should always be the focus of an institution. It should always be top of mind when we're planning for the future of what our post-secondary institute environments look like. But also, let's say if we're trying to increase access to our post-secondary institutes and really expand that educational opportunity and that academic sphere, then we can go to, let's say, expanding interregional transit to ensure students can access their post-secondary institutes at any point or any geographic location. In planning, we have a unique concept as well, where we look at urban transects, and that goes from rural environments to, let's say, dense urban cores. And if we look at the way that we're establishing our different urban environments, and let's say find different routes and different ways that maybe we use Metrolinx or Go Transit to connect those gaps in transit infrastructure, we might be able to alleviate not only the financial burden that students are facing when they're trying to access transit, but also that limited transit accessibility and limited mobility option for them as well. So that might be like an example of what we could do for transit. But a big part of, let's say, addressing the invisible barriers is really engaging with those different communities and those different students on campus, hearing their voice and understanding their needs as well, and then having that dialogue and getting them engaged on developing campus master plans and seeing exactly where these barriers exist. So, hope that also answers that question.
I want to let's like go back more to like a personal side about you. I want to ask you, what got you interested in, we already talked about advocacy, how you got involved in that, but what got you interested in planning and accessibility in general?
I would say what really got me interested in planning at first was this ironic situation where I actually was not interested in planning. So a little bit of backstory about me, I guess, if we're going back in time. I came out of high school and I was very interested in architecture. And I applied to the University of Waterloo for architecture, but I got deferred to planning. And I actually look back at that situation now, and I realized that planning was probably the best program for me in its entirety. For example, I was passionate about people. I was passionate about identifying different issues that exist in different communities, and I was passionate about, as the name suggests, planning, event organizing, a lot of administration, and really looking at what's the issue, how to plan for it, how to solve for it, and developing different, let's say, site designs that might encapsulate different themes or different, I guess you could say, solutions to different burdens that different community members were facing. So that's my origin of planning. And after developing my knowledge on that for 2 years, I realized that transit accessibility and what we define as access plays such a huge role in what we do on a day-to-day basis. For example, we talk about access in terms of going from point A to point B. And within your day, you do so many different things. Let's say you wake up in the morning, you make breakfast, you go to classes, you go to another class, you go grab lunch, then you go to the gym, you go to another class, and then you don't even end the day there. Maybe you go get groceries and then perhaps go to the gym, then finally go home. And within all of that, you're moving constantly. So the idea of student mobility, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and how exactly you're impacting others, was just of so much interest to me, which is why I really love transit planning, because all we do is talk about getting from point A to point B and how you do that and how much it costs, because we all love money. So that's kind of like the origin of why I really got invested in this idea of accessibility and access and how it plays such an important role in what we do on a day-to-day basis.
So to close off the episode today, I just wanted to ask you quickly, how would you, if a student were to become interested in advocacy, what would be the best advice that you would give them with your background in it and, in your current role?
I would probably start with another origin story to kind of explain like how exactly I played into this role of advocacy and how I'm using my own knowledge from my own degree in what I'm doing today. I started with a lot of volunteer groups and organizations when I first came to university. And through connecting with other people and groups and finding out what you're passionate about, you actually find other ways that you can advocate for people. For example, although I was learning through planning how to engage with different community members, how to essentially identify issues as a community and having that community lens and then looking forward to solving them through different perspectives. I'm getting a call right now too. I don't know how that happened, but it's ongoing. By doing that and kind of engaging on the grassroots level, you'll slowly build up your knowledge and interest in different advocacy issues and what you're passionate about. So if that's the route that you took, I think that's really incredible. And let's say you're passionate about advocacy now and you kind of want to get engaged on that front. I would say your student unions are always ready for an open conversation about change that you want to see on your campus and how to best achieve that. the ending goal, or the end of the day goal of a lot of institutions, is to support, advocate for, and alleviate burdens that students might face while they're attending post-secondary institutes, and giving them that quality education that they deserve. So if you're on the path and you're trying to decide what you're going to do and where you're going to go, I think the first step is always contacting, let's say, different local organizations that might represent the advocacy work that you want to do, going to your student union saying, I've identified an issue, I would like to talk about ways that we can solve it and advocate for it. And that can include, let's say, joining your different student government on your campus itself. And I'd say the first option is really just to stay engaged. Let's say you're not that interested in joining student government in general. As long as you really establish yourself and kind of know what you're advocating for, whether you're doing that alone or in a group, you'll always find a way to express yourself, let's say municipally, provincially, or federally. And those resources are out there to help you do that. It just depends on what groups you go to. So I would say that would be what I would say for that.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a great piece of advice for our listeners today. So thank you for that. Just to close off the show, is there anything that you want to bring up at the, as we're ending off the show? Any last remarks?
I would just say thank you for having me. And then if you're ever interested in my journey or how exactly I came to be in planning, then randomly in student government and why I was interested in it, or learn more about my experience, you can find me at my institution at OUSA, or you can find me through LinkedIn, because I think a lot of people stalk people on LinkedIn nowadays. So
yeah.
I'm not sure if that makes it easier, but that would probably be my last remark for that. And thank you, Charlie, for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show today. This was a really interesting conversation, and one that I feel like a lot of people overlook. So it's good that we had this conversation. So thank you, and bye everyone.